So we have a couple of more things to do before we let you go. And one of this is having a conversation that focuses around the brief history of the Institute, which is something we are asking you to indulge us in since we are in our 10th anniversary year. I am going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves, and then I'll explain a little bit about the format that we're going to use today. So I'm Stacie Goddard. I'm the current faculty director of the Albright Institute.
I'm George Orwell, and I study misinformation. But when I'm not, I'm Takis Metaxas in computer science, and I was the previous director of the Albright Institute.
I'm Albright.
Of the Institute.
I'm Joseph Joyce. I'm a member of the economics department, and I had the honor and privilege of being the first faculty director of the Institute for 7 years.
So the format is going to be straightforward. I have some questions to ask everybody. But before we do that, there is one thing I didn't send along to all of you. And as I mentioned, this is the 10th anniversary of the Albright Institute. And we actually had a celebration of the anniversary back in October during Very Wellesley weekend. And one of the things that we did as we were gathering RSVPs from fellows that came back is we had asked people, really primarily as an assessment tool, what they could say about their the Institute's contributions to their life and their career. And we got well over 100 responses. And what we saw when we read them wasn't just simply what we hoped for was an assessment, but we saw a real profound expression of gratitude. And that gratitude really belongs to all of you here as the founders of the Institute, as the successor who also built it up. So what we want to do is have some of those quotations read out, and they're going to be read by our current fellows.
Nice.
The Albright Fellowship made my Wellesley experience. It provided a stepping stone for me to develop a stronger multidisciplinary approach towards problem solving. Working closely with peers from different majors, backgrounds, and countries together, we transcended academic and national boundaries to develop solutions to pressing global issues. Years later, this global interdisciplinary approach has set me up for success doing the same in my own career, where day-to-day I work with colleagues based in different countries and across different skill sets to tackle problems. Albright Fellow 2015.
The fellowship was my first real experience with interdisciplinary work at Wellesley. I had had other group projects, certainly, but never with students from such diverse backgrounds and interests. It was a window into how the world actually works and has since served as a foundation for the interdisciplinary group work I lead and contribute to in my current career.
I can honestly say that the winter session and subsequent summer internship I completed as part of the fellowship played a substantial role in the current career path I am pursuing in space and science policy, a field I would not have been introduced to without the fellowship. My love of solving global problems with an interdisciplinary lens began with the fellowship and continues to guide me in my work today. Albright Fellow 2018.
The Albright Institute was a transformative experience for me. It gave me firsthand experience with trying to tackle problems on a global scale. It allowed me to collaborate with my peers, truly leveraging our multidisciplinary liberal arts education to come up with innovative, responsible solutions. The Institute helped me to build my confidence and challenged me to grow beyond my academic comfort zone. Albright Fellow 2013.
As a fellow from the inaugural class, I have some distance from the Institute and recognize what an incredible opportunity it was for a college student. The Albright Institute shaped my future confidence from working with the team to my comfort level with public speaking and leadership positions. After all, if you can present to Secretary Albright, you can present with confidence to anyone. Albright Fellow 2010.
The Albright Institute completely changed my life trajectory. As a neuroscience major, I started the session with a passion for international affairs, but little experience working on global issues. After 3 weeks of learning from global leaders by day and developing policy recommendations by night with a team of strangers who seemed like they were speaking a different language from me, I emerged with the realization that I loved cross-cutting work and wanted to dedicate my career to global health. The Albright Institute offered me invaluable insights into what a career in public service could look like, trained me in how to engage in productive dialogue with anyone across the table, and gave me the courage, the foundations, and a network of supporters to pursue a completely new career path 3 months before college graduation. Albright Fellow 2011.
So I hope you understand those were too good not to share. So let me begin the conversation simply by saying thank you. Thank you for what you built. Thank you for bringing all of these fellows in the room. Thank you for bringing us here. So with that in mind, let me delve into this history of the Institute. And if I can start with you, Secretary Albright, you have ties to so many places, right? You did your graduate work at Columbia. You are currently at Georgetown. What made you want to bring this institute to Wellesley College?
Well, first of all, thank you to everybody that's here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation and certainly to what you are doing now, which is just fantastic. But I really need to thank Joe and Takis Joe for thinking up how we needed to do things, and Takis for developing it in an even larger direction in what you're doing now. And I think it is just what I love about the whole thing is the organic evolution of it, because I can honestly tell you that as we thought about it with my best buddies, Winnie and Suzan there, really, we didn't know what we wanted to do. Just the idea that Wellesley was an incredible place. In my case, I have to say, without exaggeration, everything that I am now is due to having been at Wellesley. I really believe it. I loved it. I was grateful to be here. My friends come from here. I quote my Wellesley professors. By the way, I may need the Margaret Ball book back. But I took advantage of things. Alona Evans, I took international law from, and I was the Chief Justice of the Iceland fisheries case. But all kinds of things that really were a signpost for where I thought I might want to go. It never, ever occurred to me that I would be Secretary of State. But I did want to understand foreign policy. So Wellesley has really been the bedrock of my experience, and it made so much sense. And I also had spent a lot of time trying to figure out how a woman works in an international environment, which is not friendly to women, and yet knowing that there was an incredible source and resource of very smart women at Wellesley that would make a difference and would create a network of women then that could operate then internationally. So why not?
One thing you mentioned in there that I want to pick up on a bit is the role of your friends, of in particular Winnie and Suzan that are here today in creating this institute. Why was this important to them?
I don't know, ask them.
Okay. I'm sure you must know something.
Well, I think that we had similar experiences and liked it here, took a lot of classes together, and we also talked a lot about the role of women generally in the political sphere and in education and in literature, and had realized, by the way, 1959 was a long time ago, and basically the role of women, we all wanted to do something, yet it was not something that was in our futures in many ways. And the class of 59 in many ways was a transitional class in terms of where women, what was expected of us and what we might want to do. And so I think we used to talk about it on a regular basis about why couldn't we do more, what would be a good idea in terms of training other women. And we all, we had different feelings about Wellesley, all of them positive, but had seen it from a different perspective. And so it made so much sense. Now, the only thing, when I was here, my name was Korbel, therefore I was in the middle of the alphabet. When I went to Columbia, my name was Albright, and so I was at the beginning, and I always got called on first. So I have better memories from here.
So one thing that I think about as trying to imagine 10 years ago, or obviously before that, you're imagining building this institute, right? And it's a blank slate. You could have done anything. How did you decide this was what you wanted to do? Were there core principles that you really wanted to capture here, and that's you? And Professor Joyce, obviously you were involved in thinking about this framework as well.
Well, I think the following thing, because I had service in government, in foreign policy and international relations in a wider sense, and I could see what were the tools that I needed that I hadn't had. And it was lonely, that's for sure. But also, one of the things about Washington, in case you haven't noticed, is that the whole plan when you're in a meeting with more than one person is to make sure that that person looks stupider than you are. And so there was not enough teamwork. And that so much of the kinds of things, in order to get anything done, had to do with teamwork. And I felt that that was an important part. I also thought that I had missed a lot of, even at Wellesley, of a multidisciplinary education. And that given the kinds of things that were happening in the world, that it was very important for a political scientist to actually think about science. By the way, when I went to find my first job, which was in Rolla, Missouri, and I went to the Rolla School of Mines in order to see if I could find a job, and I said I was a political science major, and they said, what kind of science is that? But I think that what we needed to really understand something about science. And so kind of looking at what the issues were that we're going to be dealing in the 21st century were much wider, frankly, than just being a poli-sci or history major, and that therefore the multidisciplinary part of it made a big difference. So the idea of working in a team, and frankly something that's also true of the government, is all of a sudden ending up somewhere where you have no idea who the people you are working with you. And I would, as secretary, would all of a sudden be briefed by somebody I'd never seen before, and how you develop trust in who is giving you the information. And therefore, that combination of team, but also with people you don't know, in order to get to know them and figure out how they fit in, are they telling you the truth? And this is the part that I also thought was important, is to spend time with people that you disagreed with, and that they felt free in stating their views, and you felt free in stating your views. So it was that whole combination. And Joe picked it up, I think, and then really began to push it in a number of different directions.
And how would you say you pushed that, right? Because you got the framework, you got the principles of interdisciplinary, of teamwork, of collaboration. What did that look like?
So I should start by saying that I don't want to get more credit than I deserve, because I did have a colleague, and that was Joanne Murray, another Wellesley College alumna who was at the college at the time. And we spent an immense amount of time thrashing out all the things that we now take for granted. But when we started talking about it back in 2008 or 9, I hadn't met the secretary yet, so we hadn't had any personal communication, but I was well aware of her reputation, and it was an outstanding one. And one of the principles we adhered to at the beginning was, we're not Harvard, we're not the Kennedy School, we're not here to prepare people to be diplomats. What do? Well, we teach women, and we teach them really well the liberal arts canon. So that was kind of where we were coming from. That is a grounding principle. What could we do well? And with that as the background, clearly multidisciplinary meant that I had colleagues on this campus who were fabulous teachers in a whole range of disciplines. So we knew we had that as a resource. I obviously knew that we had many, many alumni who had done fabulous things in terms of their careers and are very generous with their time and willing to come back and speak to the students. So we had that on the resource. And then the notion of teamwork. We thought it was very important to have not just people come and speak to the students, as nice as that would be for them, but for them to do some sort of project as well. So we chose 40 as the number so that we could have 8 teams of 5, and that would come up to 40. And it was important at the very beginning to make sure that each team reflected the various strengths of the fellows. The last thing I wanted was 5 econ majors on one team. They had to be sitting next to a biology major and a French literature major, et cetera, and they had to represent different nationalities. So from the very beginning, that notion of teamwork was important. And my sense is that we stumbled onto something really important, that since that first year, the fellows have uniformly said that was really important, being forced to work with other women who do not share your same background in terms of academia, even nationality. And that experience of having to do that has been transformative.
So I asked Secretary Albright why she wanted to bring this to Wellesley, and I want to ask you why you wanted to step in as the first faculty director. I mean, we all do have other things to do, I've heard. So why was this important to you?
So that's a really good question, Stacie. When I first, you showed us some of the questions last week, I was trying to put myself mentally back 10 years ago, trying to remember what was going on. And I could give you some of the details. My own background, in fact, happens to be Georgetown. And I actually went to the School of Foreign Service. So the notion of an undergraduate program on international relations wasn't exactly foreign. But to be honest, Stacie, without sounding too self-patronizing, I just had a sense this would be a good thing to do. Not just in a personal sense, not just for me, but that if you work at a place like Wellesley, you're aware of the fact that it has many strengths, and there are many outstanding people at this college. At that time, Diana Walsh was the president. I was an off her. I still am. You work with people who are tremendous. And when all of a sudden a chance comes to do something which might be useful for the institution that you think you could do, you say yes. No one else seemed to be interested in doing this at the time. It was a brand new project. No one knew what we were even talking about. As I said, I had the Georgetown experience. I didn't know Madeleine. I was very conscious of who she was. And as I always tell my students, you should always work with the best people you can. And in a sense, it was like that. If I could do anything with Madeleine Albright, for me, that would be personally rewarding. So it was a challenge. I wasn't quite sure how we were going to do it, but it sounded like a good thing to do. And I really would say that to the fellows, that those things come along in life, not as often as we would like, but when they do, you should grab it. When there's a chance to do something different, special, where you work with really good people, you should take that chance, because that will be important for you as you go along in your lives and careers.
So Takis, it's funny because you were actually talking about this at the table, right? So you came in after Joe, and you are a computer science professor, right? And so we're thinking about how it is, who steps in as the next director. It wasn't exactly obvious, your connection to global affairs. How did you see yourself as stepping in as a faculty director and your type of contributions?
Right. I'm a computer scientist. and so I was surprised initially when, but I decided that I would say yes quickly before Joe realizes that he
you
was
were a
talking to
computer scientist?
Yeah. And it worked. By the time I got involved as a director, the Albright was already a well-known entity. It was something that people wanted to support, wanted to take, some part in it. And in fact, I was involved as a member of the advisory board for 1 or 2 years before that. So I was familiar with the Albright and what was doing. And I had some ideas about how I would like it to, evolve in some sense. Because I thought at that time, and I still do, that ignoring the role of technology in global affairs, it was actually something that we shouldn't continue doing. I had, I guess, back then some ideas that they looked kind of weird, but now I don't think I would surprise anybody when I say that you cannot really do effective global policy without understanding technology. A week ago, there was a drone that made some decision about when to fire, and that almost led to a war. And I'm not sure if it was a human on the other end who made this decision. So what you have in mind that you want to do, once you add technology, gets out of the ordinary. So I thought this was a very exciting thing for me to do, and that's why I accepted the job.
You said you wanted to see it evolve. If I could push you on a bit, how did you want to, you obviously bringing technology in, but how do you think it evolved in that next set of years?
Yeah, well, with discussions with the secretary, that made the difference, because I knew that first I have to persuade the secretary that actually I had something in mind, and thank God it was not that difficult. Yeah, it was good. So until the time I got involved, there was a kind of set plan for the Albright. The Albright students, the Albright Fellows would study very important topics discussed by the United Nations, the Millennial Goal and the Sustainability Goal, and they would work on those. And I thought that maybe what we could do is to add some theme to each one of those. The first thing that I wanted to add had to do with collaboration, which is central, essentially. You know, it was very inspiring that the Albright started having 8 groups of 5 fellows from different disciplines. This collaboration is really the force of progress. We don't give it much attention, but it is really the force of progress. That's how the world goes forth. We usually think of the history as a sequence of wars, but if you do this exercise, you take any part of the world and you draw a line with the years and you put the wars, you would see that most of the line is empty. What happens then is collaboration, is when people get together and do that. So we started talking about globalizations and the effects that globalizations have, this kind of global collaboration, and things were going fine, and then the elections happened. And suddenly we realized that technology could have a major role in giving us an impression of what is true and what is false. So the second year, we discussed the challenges that technology brings into what we believe and why we believe what we believe. And in the third year, we took it even further and we tried to figure out what challenges democracy is encountering. Very timely. I was influenced, of course, from the fact that your book, Secretary, was published. I knew about that coming, so I thought that you cannot avoid the question of technology. And in there, you have a very interesting passage when you're describing how Nazi Germany took advantage of the radio of the time and was like, yes, and now we don't call it radio, we call it social media. So these were the kind of things I wanted to bring. So sorry for the long answer, but it was exciting to me.
Well, in some ways, the reason I wanted to bring this out is you've all talked a lot today about the importance of multidisciplinary work in producing your projects and how meaningful that's been. And one thing that I think it was just worth highlighting is how much, even through the leadership and development of the program, that it's a multidisciplinary project, right? That it's our interaction with not just students across disciplines, but also amongst ourselves that creates and broadens and transforms what we actually do here. So actually coming in from this different discipline was really, really important. But another thing you mentioned, reminds me, you mentioned the 2016 election. So let me ask, not to give just one answer to it.
Had you forgotten it?
I was trying. I was trying so hard, Takis. But it makes me think of the challenges of the Institute. And there are many, right? I mean, the Institute, we were talking about this yesterday, starts in 2009. So it starts on the heels of the financial crisis, right? It moves through elections. As the people this year know, we ended up adding some special sections to talk about what was going on between the United States and Iran this year. There are all these challenges that come up. What have been the type of challenges that you've coped of in the Institute, either from out there in the political and global world or from inside the Institute itself? What's been the most challenging?
So I would say that when we started, we were indeed coming out of a financial crisis, but there was a sense of recovery. It was slow, we wanted to be faster, more could be done, but we were coming back. And 10 years later, Stacie, I'm not sure I have that feeling anymore. That yes, we went through the crisis, but we wound up in a very different place. And that, to speak more broadly, after 25 years of globalization, we're now in an era of reaction. And it certainly is not just the United States, that around the world you see government after government trying to, in a sense, push back against the type of globalization that, quite frankly, we took for granted maybe 25, 30 years ago. And Madeleine, this worries me sometimes, because on the one hand, it tells me that our work here is even more important than we thought it was 10 years ago. But I can't help but think, but in some ways it might be more difficult, in the sense that things we took for granted, something as basic as the golden rule, you treat other people well, that you don't even think about. Well, not everybody agrees with that. And so making policy in a world in which there are such fundamental disagreements about why we need policy and what policy can do, to me is a challenge. And I have to be honest, I don't quite know how we would talk about that in the context of the Institute, but I feel it's something to at least put on the table to acknowledge that the world is very different than it was 10 years ago.
Well, I think that I fully agree with Joe on this in terms of how the world is different, and some of it because of the kinds of things that you've been doing in technology and the rapidity of information and the hacking of information and any number of different things that people didn't think about. But one of the things that bothers me a lot is that there has been this rise of hypernationalism. And it's one thing to be proud of one's identity, but if my identity hates your identity, it is very dangerous. And so I think that one of the great aspects about this cohort is what we heard and what we've seen is we have women of a variety of nationalities and having a sense about what their history is and how and what we have in common. I think that is a very large part that Wellesley provides is a very diverse group of students. And I think that is something that's important, and the respect that has to come once people really work together, when they know something about it. And so there are things about technology that has to be seen. You know, technology is truly Frankenstein. I mean, it's you don't know how it affects people. And I also do think that one of the hardest parts, especially in a liberal arts school, is what is truth? And I think that it is very hard to figure out what it is in terms of where people get their information, how it is processed. Is it different if it's processed by somebody from a different country or whatever? But I think that what I have loved about all of this is the sense that the students and their speakers feel comfortable enough asking questions like that, that it's not unpatriotic or prejudiced or counterintuitive, but the bottom line is there is this freedom of expression that only an academic institution can provide. And so having the sense that you could ask the questions in a multinational place with women that are interested in facts. So that's the basis of it.
Going into where you were ending, Madeleine. So the fellows have actually first experience in the power of this collaboration and the fact that they can trust each other. And it's not only you, of course. There are over 400 of you out there. And you can count on each other because not only you have been through Wellesley, but you have been also through this kind of experience. You should not be shy in talking to each other. You should keep up these connections because no matter where you end up, checking to see what other Albright Fellow is in the neighborhood is going to add a lot of power to what you do. Collaboration is the name of the solution. It is how the world should work and something that you can do. So this is the challenge for you. Going back to your original question you were asking about the challenges I was facing. You know, I was coming with an institute that was already very well working, so I did not have too many challenges. But I did find out that there was another program at Wellesley with which the Albright did not have kind of the smoothest relation. And the first thing I did is I went and I met these people and I said, let's sit down and figure out what are differences. Guess what? There weren't many. Once you sit down and you can express that I trust you and you can see that they trust you, yeah, you know what I mean? Then it's easy to come up with a solution. And eventually, I think after that, the Albright became stronger. That's the advice. You know, don't be afraid to talk to each other, and don't be afraid to make sure that your network has a degree of interaction of one with each other.
So thinking forward now rather than backward, hopefully the Albright Institute has a very long future at Wellesley College. So if you're looking out, we'll try to make it as simple as possible, 10 years from now, where would you like to see the Institute moving? What do you think it should be focusing on going forward?
I hope we never lose the very first notion of the importance of service, that this is a fabulous program. The fellows have great stories to tell about their 3 weeks, and that's wonderful, and we're happy about that. But from the very first day when we started to work with Madeleine, we were conscious of the fact that it was her name on the Institute, and she stood for something above and beyond simply being a good professional. And I was struck last night by the story she told about her involvement in Bosnia and Kosovo. That was a hell of a thing to do. There was no reason why you had to do that. I doubt President Clinton called you in and said the most important thing for my administration is Bosnia. I doubt senators were calling you up demanding you get involved. But you did it. And that really, really struck me later on, that you had the fortitude, the courage to say this is an issue that this country has to stand for. I hope that type of message is still part of the Institute in 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, I do hope that we can understand what the issues are out there that need to be dealt with by this particular kind of cohort of multidisciplinary, multinational group of women. I also think that what is important is we've had very interesting meetings with faculty, and it's something, Stacie, that you've really been focused on, is how to give the Albright experience in some way to a larger group without undermining it. And that's not simple. And I think that we need to see whether it is a method of teaching, of understanding the team efforts, and of not over-politicizing it, because I think, we're not one party or anything like that, but I think that trying to figure out how to create a positive experience that then allows the kind of service. And the other part I would like to see more, by the way, I always say the following thing, that women are very good at making friends and not so good at networking, with apologies. Men are better at networking than making friends. So I think the bottom line is we need to learn how to network because so many of the things that are out there to be done need to happen with other teams. And the women that are out now, there are 400 out there, that are in a variety of positions, whether they're in their governments or in the private sector, as in the business or in the NGO part. I think that it's very important to keep in contact and kind of figure out how we can continue to help each other and be a force for good. I do think the world is a mess. That's a diplomatic term of art. And the bottom line is that there are things that are needed in terms of trying to understand identity versus hyper-nationalism, understand the value of technology versus its downside of spreading drones that don't know what they're doing. And then I think also, I do believe in government service. And I hope that a lot of our cohort think about it in the United States or in other countries, because I believe in government and I believe in the social contract. And I think, which is why it's important to have taken philosophy and to understand various parts. And I think we need to stay up to date without being just fashionable.
Pretty much my answer is very close to that, because look what happens. I don't think if you show the program of the Institute to any other Wellesley student, they will look at it and they will say, I'm not interested in that. There will be so many interesting talks, so many interesting discussions that they all want to participate. It's difficult to take this group of 40 and make it a group of 600. It's extremely difficult, but at least some way of having the student body have a little more experience, have a little more participation in what happens in these 10 years, I think it's going to be great. I think it's something, we have so many faculty from Wellesley that they have participated, they have taught, they're in the 60s, I think, the number of, so putting together a program, a semester in which, it's a seminar in which, students come and they start from the beginning talking about a project, and then they follow these lectures over a semester. It's something that's doable without huge resources. I don't say you have to do it. I'm just saying in 10 years, it might be good if we have this kind of dissemination of the experience to a larger group.
Oh, I think that's right. I think that's right. So just in closing, very simply, again, thank you. Thank you for building this. Thank you for building this here. And I think all of our fellows would join us in saying it really has been a remarkable
Stacie,
experience.
I want to thank you for really taking this up, because there have been two incredible people that have done it before, and why you are doing it and giving it your emphasis and enthusiasm and everything. So thank you particularly.
Thank you.
So a few words just before we move to the actual closing. And again, I want to reiterate, I just can't stop saying thank you, but I mean it. I want to thank not only everybody, I want to thank the fellows in this room. And I want to say a couple of my own words in closing, and then I want to invite somebody up to say something to you. You know, it's funny, we hear, one thing I feel like I've heard over and over again is, you know, we want this to be interdisciplinary, and we certainly don't want it to be political scientists, and I'm one. So what do I hope that I've brought to you, and what do I hope you've brought out of this program? And it's something that I felt so deeply when I heard all of you talking about your group experiences today. The focus of what I study in international relations is great power politics. And one thing that's always been a takeaway for me in that might sound extremely strange, that the key to successful great power politics is empathy. Great power politics, or any politics for that matter, only work when actors are empathetic towards each other. It doesn't mean that they agree. It doesn't mean that they necessarily don't know where their points of not being able to compromise are. But it does mean that the first question they ask each other when their interests do not align is why. That you do not assume when you wake up in the morning that the person who disagrees with you is doing that because they're evil, that they are not cooperating with you because somehow that's about hurt. That you try to figure out what it is, what that obstacle to cooperation is, and use that as the starting point of collaboration rather than as the moment you walk away. And I do hope and I do believe that all of you got to experience that here at this institute. And I hope that is something that you're able to take out in the world beyond. So again, thank you once again for participating in that with all of us here. Thank you. And with that in mind, for those of you who might not know, the Albright Institute actually has a poet laureate. And that is Secretary Albright's dear friend, Suzan Terrace. So if I can invite her up now to read, or I can bring this down to you, a few words of poetry to our fellows.
This may seem like it's a very short poem. It may seem like a strange little poem to read to you. But when we first came to Wellesley, we had Dean Jean, who used to tell us that the Wellesley girls came into her and said, "I'm a leader, but here no one knows it." Or else, "I'm a kind of prodigy, but here nobody knows it." So this poem has in its background two things, very briefly. One is the song from the Mikado about the flowers that bloom in the spring. And those of you who know the Mikado know that there are 3 young women who've just graduated from school, as you will do at some point. And the other is Isaac Stern had a whole theory about musicians, that when they got out of their teenage prodigy years, that they had to develop in a different way. So that's what this poem is about. Memo to the former child prodigy. By the age of 9, you knew everything, tra-la. Had met 2 presidents, tra-la. Could explain pi, memorize Shakespeare's soliloquies, or checkmate anyone blindfolded. Child's play, violin, oboe, harpsichord, duplicate bridge. So what then was left to do? Cut corners, fit in, marry someone, polish silver, slap your children, or go back to 1, tra-la, then 2, and so forth, till you learn to love all that blooms in the spring. All of you have grown up, you're brilliant young women, I've listened to all of you speak. And we all have things that we carry with us from childhood, if you are the way you are. I was never a prodigy, I can tell you that. But you have to let go of a lot of these things, the childish parts of it, and stop and reevaluate and become the adults that you're going to become. So that's my message to you. And thank you, Joe, for naming me as Poet Laureate. And thank you all.